$47,000. That is what your father made last year. You know this because you did his taxes. You sat at the kitchen table with a shoebox of receipts and a W-2 that had his name on it, and you did the math, and when the number came out, you didn't say anything. You just kept typing. He was in the other room watching television. He didn't know you were crying. Not because you were sad for him. Because you had just made more than that in 8 months. You didn't say anything then. You haven't said anything since. This is not a story about money. It is a story about what it costs to be the one who changes everything. And the cost is not what you think it is. It is not the work. It is not the sacrifice. It is the silence. The specific, careful, permanent silence of someone who has crossed a line their family doesn't know exists. You were born into the bottom 50% of American households. That group, according to the Federal Reserve's 2022 Survey of Consumer Finances, holds just 2.6% of total wealth in the United States. Not 20%. Not 10. 2.6. Your parents didn't know this number. Neither did you. You didn't need a number. You had the grocery store. You knew the math before you knew algebra. You knew which items were decoys, the ones that looked affordable until you added them up. You knew the specific sound of your mother's pause at the register, that half second where she's running the total in her head and deciding what goes back. You learned to make that decision for her. You'd quietly put the thing back before she had to. You told her you didn't want it anymore. You were 8. You were already managing someone else's shame. This is the inheritance you didn't ask for. Not poverty in the dramatic sense. Not hunger in the cinematic sense. The specific gray zone of almost enough. Never quite. Where your parents worked. Where they showed up. Where nothing was handed to you and nothing was possible either. And both of those facts existed in the same house at the same time, and nobody ever talked about it. The first rule. The money beliefs absorbed before age 10 run deeper than any financial education that comes after. You were not taught that money was scarce. You were shown. Every day. In ways so normal they didn't even register as lessons. They just became the air. The crack appeared when you were 17. A teacher. Nothing dramatic. She didn't change your life with a speech. She just handed back a paper you'd written and said, quietly, that you should consider applying somewhere bigger. That was it. That was the whole thing. But something shifted. Not in your circumstances, in the size of what you thought was possible. The scholarship came. Not a full one, a partial one. $6,200 a year toward a school that cost $28,400. You made it work. You took the loans. According to Federal Reserve data, the average student loan balance for first-generation college graduates is $33,000 at graduation. You were at $31,400. Right on schedule for a life no one in your family had lived. You moved into a dorm room smaller than your childhood bedroom. Your roommate had a laptop that cost more than your mother's car. You didn't say that out loud. You started learning the language. Not just the coursework, the other language. The way certain people talked about money as if it were a minor inconvenience rather than the entire organizing principle of existence. You watched, and you learned, and you filed it away. That is what you do when you grow up where you grew up. You observe. You adapt. You become fluent in a dialect that is not yours. Then came the $847 tax return. Your first one. Filed yourself. You sat in the library, and you did it on a free website, and when the refund number appeared, you stared at it for a long time. $847. For most of your friends, that was a weekend. For you, it was the first time a financial decision you made produced a positive outcome. It was the first time you felt like maybe you were a participant in this system, rather than just someone it was happening to. That feeling is small. It is also everything. The double life begins quietly. It doesn't announce itself. One day, you're home for Christmas, and your cousin is asking you to explain what a 401k is, and your uncle is making a joke about Wall Street people, and you smile and say nothing, and you realize you have become someone who says nothing. Not because you're ashamed of where you came from, because you have no idea how to build a bridge between where you were and where you are, and you're not sure the bridge would hold both directions anyway. Pew Research Center's economic mobility data shows that only 7% of children born into the bottom income quintile reach the top quintile as adults. 7%. You are trying to be in that 7%. You don't know that number yet. You just know you're somewhere between two worlds, and you don't fully belong to either one. At work, you code switch. You learn to describe your childhood in ways that land as charming rather than heavy. You learn which stories are safe. You learn that the story about helping your dad fix the car with parts from a junkyard plays well. The story about the lights being cut off does not. So you tell one and not the other. You become an editor of yourself. You do it so automatically that eventually you forget you're doing it. Meanwhile, your family calls. The calls have a texture. There is news. And then there is the real reason for the call. And you have learned to wait for the real reason. Sometimes it's rent. Sometimes it's a bill that arrived at the wrong time. Sometimes it's just your mother needing to hear your voice because you are the one who left, and leaving, even when it's the right thing, leaves a space that doesn't fill. You help when you can. You feel guilty when you can't. You feel guiltier when you can. The second rule: the first person in a family to build wealth doesn't just change their bank account. They change what their family believes is possible. That is a heavier thing to carry than it sounds. The guilt has a specific shape. It is not the guilt of wrongdoing. It is the guilt of distance, of watching someone you love live inside a system you are slowly learning to exit, while they have no idea the exit exists. The moment you make more in a month than your father made in a year is not triumphant. It is disorienting in a way you were completely unprepared for. You thought it would feel like winning. It feels like standing in a room with no furniture. Technically spacious, actually strange. You don't tell your parents what you make, not out of cruelty, out of a calculation you make instinctively. The information would not help them, and it might hurt them. So you manage the information the way you once managed the grocery cart. Quietly, efficiently, in a way that protects someone else's dignity at the cost of your own ease. You don't explain what a Roth IRA is, because explaining it would take 3 hours and end with your mother feeling ashamed that she didn't know.